The chandelier lights danced across the reception hall as Jessica sat beside her boyfriend Ryan, watching their closest friends celebrate their new marriage. These weren't just any friends. They were the very people who had introduced Jessica and Ryan to each other 3 years ago, setting in motion a love story that had flourished into something beautiful and profound. At 26, Jessica had weathered enough failed relationships to recognize something special when she found it. And Ryan, with his warm laugh and attentive nature, had shown her what genuine partnership felt like. He was sweet without being saccharine, thoughtful without keeping score, and possessed emotional intelligence that had healed parts of Jessica she hadn't realized were broken. For the first time in her life, she understood what people meant when they talked about healthy love. Their relationship had gradually deepened over their 3 years together. Late-night conversations about the future had evolved into more concrete discussions about marriage. They'd even spent a Saturday afternoon several weeks ago browsing engagement rings, Jessica's heart fluttering as Ryan took note of which styles made her eyes light up. The question wasn't if they would get married, it was when and how the proposal would happen. A few weeks before this wedding, the 4 friends had gathered at the soon-to-be-married couple's apartment, sharing wine and excitement about the upcoming nuptials. Wedding talk dominated the evening, from flower arrangements to family drama. In a moment of levity, Ryan had raised his glass with a mischievous grin. "Maybe I'll just propose to Jessica at your wedding," he joked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. The groom-to-be laughed heartily. "That'd be funny as hell." Jessica had felt a knot form in her stomach. She'd exchanged glances with the bride-to-be, both shaking their heads emphatically. "Please don't," Jessica had said, keeping her tone light but firm. "Every couple deserves their own special moment." The bride had nodded in agreement, and Jessica had assumed the matter was settled, a fleeting joke, nothing more. She'd been wrong. The wedding reception was in full swing, the speeches concluded, and the buffet line began to form. Their table was still waiting their turn when Ryan excused himself. Jessica watched curiously as he approached the DJ booth, leaning in to speak with the man behind the equipment. Moments later, the opening notes of "Story of My Life" by One Direction, their road trip anthem, the song they screamed at the top of their lungs with the windows down, filled the reception hall. Jessica turned to Ryan with a smile, a wave of affection washing over her. But the look on his face gave her a pause. His eyes were darting around the room, his fingers drumming against the tablecloth. Before she could ask what was wrong, he grabbed his fork and stood up, tapping it forcefully against his champagne glass. The crystal chime cut through the music and conversation. Heads turned. Servers paused with trays in hand. The entire reception area, nearly 200 people, fell silent and looked toward their table. In that freezing moment, Jessica understood what was about to happen. Her stomach dropped as if she'd missed a step on a staircase. This was supposed to be her friend's day, their celebration, their moment in the spotlight. And Ryan was about to hijack it despite their explicit conversation just weeks before. She stood quickly, her chair making a soft scrape against the floor. "Not right now," she whispered urgently, her voice barely audible but her eyes conveying the gravity of her words. The change in Ryan's expression was immediate and devastating. His face crumpled, color rushing to his cheeks. He lowered the fork with a trembling hand. "I'm sorry," he called out awkwardly to the sea of curious onlookers. "I was just joking." The words fell flat, hanging uncomfortably in the air as confused murmurs rippled through the reception. As they both sat back down, Jessica reached for his hand under the table. "Let them have their moment," she whispered gently. "Let's make this our own." She tried to infuse her words with all the love she felt for him, to make him understand this wasn't a rejection of him, but of the timing and setting. Ryan wouldn't meet her eyes. His shoulders hunched forward, his jaw tight with what looked like a mixture of embarrassment and anger. When their table was finally called to the buffet line, Ryan stood abruptly. Instead of heading toward the food, he made a beeline for the exit. Jessica followed, weaving between tables and apologizing as she bumped into guests. The heavy reception hall doors swung shut behind her as she entered the hotel lobby, frantically scanning for Ryan's familiar silhouette. But he had vanished. She sent 2 text messages and tried calling twice, each unanswered attempt increasing her anxiety. After 15 minutes of searching, she returned to the reception alone, forcing a smile as friends asked where Ryan had gone. An hour and a half crawled by. Jessica picked at her now cold food, made small talk with tablemates, and checked her phone obsessively. Just as the cake cutting was about to begin, Ryan reappeared, sliding silently into his seat. His eyes were rimmed with red, his expression closed and distant. He didn't acknowledge Jessica's presence, didn't respond to her whispered questions about where he'd been. The remainder of the evening stretched painfully before them. While couples swayed on the dance floor and laughter echoed around them, Ryan sat like a statue beside her. Jessica tried valiantly to enjoy the celebration, but his palpable misery cast a shadow over every moment. She steeled herself for the inevitable confrontation, rehearsing explanations and apologies for the drive home, but when they finally slid into his car, Ryan simply stared straight ahead at the darkened road. "I don't want to talk about it right now," he said, his voice hollow. The 20-minute drive passed in excruciating silence, punctuated only by the soft hum of the engine and the occasional click of the turn signal. The next morning, Jessica's phone buzzed with a lengthy text from Ryan. His words were raw with hurt. He described in painful detail the effort he'd put into selecting the perfect ring, his conviction that proposing at the wedding of the friends who had introduced them would be romantically poetic. Most devastating was his assertion that her interruption had been a public rejection from the person he trusted most in the world. Jessica's fingers trembled as she typed her response, trying to make him understand that her hesitation had nothing to do with not wanting to marry him. She explained again about respecting their friend's special day, about wanting their own engagement to be unique and not derivative. She assured him of her love, of her desire to build a future with him. His reply was swift and cutting. "If you wanted to marry me, you wouldn't have stopped my proposal in front of everybody. You cared more about what people would think than about our moment." Days later, Jessica sat alone in her apartment, turning the situation over and over in her mind. She had always believed they communicated well, that they understood each other's values and perspectives. Yet somehow, this fundamental difference in what they considered appropriate had blindsided them both. Ryan remained convinced she had humiliated him, ruined a perfect proposal, and demonstrated a lack of commitment to their relationship. Jessica couldn't understand how he could disregard their friend's special day and her clearly stated boundaries for the sake of a public gesture. The distance between them now felt vast and unnavigable. A 3-year relationship built on mutual respect and understanding was suddenly hanging by a thread because of different perspectives on a single moment. What would you do in Jessica's position? Was she wrong to stop the proposal at her friend's wedding? Or was Ryan overlooking an important boundary by attempting to propose in that setting despite their previous conversation? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Whose perspective resonates more with you? And how would you bridge this divide between two people who clearly love each other but find themselves at a painful impasse?